Have you ever stepped outside and found yourself with a flat tire? Do you know how to change it? Have you ever gone to get your oil changed? Did you know how many quarts went inside the engine? Do you know what a serpentine belt is? If you don't know any of these questions, it's quite alright. The majority of youth nowadays in America doesn't. A study by Forbes showed that 68% of male millennials and 78% of female millennials don't know simple tire facts as it is. As time has gone on, the younger generations have become further engapped of how mechanical items work. This makes them poorer consumers and a lot more intimidated when it comes to them actually having to have their vehicles serviced. It is my job to educate every one of you on how to approach these service situations, and by doing so I'm also going to show you the knowledge of the mechanics of the vehicle that you're driving. Every day, 1 million cars go inside and outside of Chicago. Almost 500,000 of those cars come from outlying counties around the area. They travel over 30 miles through the harshest of weathers, which we all know, Siberia, the worst of potholes, and they tend to tear up our vehicles. So whether if you like it or not, you are going to come across a point where you have to have a service interaction of taking care of your vehicle. It is shown over time that amongst purchasing your house, purchasing your vehicle will be the second most valuable asset that you ever own. As I prolong, I am a prior service advocate of a Ford dealership, of a major vehicle manufacturer in the engineering department, and it's my job to show all of you how to take care of your vehicle. I'm going to do so by covering engines, suspension, brakes, etc., different things. But we're going to go through how such operations work. To start, we're going to go into how the heart of the vehicle works, the engine. It intakes air, provides fuel, compresses it, lights the ignition, creates a combustion, pushes the piston down, and then creates a rotary motion. That motion is then transferred through the vehicle into the transmission, which we're going to get in the next slide. However, in terms of preventative maintenance of making your vehicle last longer, which is what I'm here to show you how to do, there's only pretty much two simple items as a basic consumer of what I'm going to get into. The only area you're going to want to know is to change your spark plugs and your fuel injectors. Anything else is getting a little bit out of your range, but these are common wear items that you should know how to get into. But as I said before, the power is thrusted through, goes into the transmission, and then entered into the drivetrain. Now this isn't necessarily where all the magic happens in the car. It goes through what's called the planetary gear set, which is inside of the transmission. A lot of gears are shifting. They take that torque, that energy from the engine, push it through, put it into the tires, and turn it into rotary motion. And that's what turns the tires and put it to the traction of the ground and move the vehicle along. In terms of this, there's not a lot of preventive maintenance that you can do to pretty much take care of it. You're going to have to consult your owner's manual and know when the fluid of the transmission has to be changed, which we're going to get into a little bit later on, but this is just a general idea of how it works. As the flow goes through from the engine to the transmission to the drivetrain through the axles onto the tires, tires are probably the more common thing that most consumers nowadays are going to have to come into. Tires tend to wear depending on how poor your suspension is, your steering, if they're underinflated, overinflated, but they're the most common item on the car to commonly wear. And it's the most simple thing in terms of preventive maintenance and how to take care of. Normally, if you're a little worried on how long your tires are going to last, what you can do is you can take the head of a quarter, and once the head of George Washington hits the top of the tread, that shows it's about time for tires. A little bit of lag time, but then you could take a penny and do the same thing, and once the head of Lincoln touches the top of the tread of tires, it shows it's time for new tires. Now, people sometimes only replace the one tire. That's not good for the drivetrain overall. What you're going to want to do is change them in pairs if you have front-wheel drive and rear-wheel drive. If you happen to have all-wheel drive, which a lot of cars nowadays seem to have, you're going to want to change all four tires. If you're in a pinch, yes, you can do the one, but it's strongly suggested that you do them in pairs. Once you do so, you have to have the tires balanced by a mechanic or technician, And you also have the car and vehicle aligned so that the same problem doesn't occur again. Steering and suspension. These are probably the most common wear items when it comes to a vehicle, especially in terms of Chicago. The potholes, everything, the hard steering. We all got a little aggressive with our cars, more than we should have. Majority of these items that wear come to be a knocking noise. Things that you hear against the wall, things that you shouldn't hear. And they make consumers ungodly wary on what they're trying to do. The most common things are they go up and down motion. Those are the shock absorbers and the coils, which stabilize the ride and balance the impact of the road coming into the harshness of the cabin. In terms of steering, almost the entire steering system nowadays is consisted of ball joints. These ball joints are rotary motion that go up and down and moved in a 180 degree, 360 degree, depending on how the setup is. But they wear. Over time, they start getting loose, and you start hearing creaking and groaning, and they make people very nervous. And unfortunately, these are not preventative maintenance items. The moment that you start to hear this, you should go into your local service shop and have them replaced. Because further that they go, more damage can occur, especially on road while driving. Moving on, we move on to the brakes. These are a very common item as well as the tires. When these go, they start to wear probably between 30 to 20, I'd say 20 to 40,000 miles, depending on whether you're city or you're highway driving. The majority of vehicles and the most common wear item, what I'm going to get into, is the rotor, caliper, and pad system. The rotor is the motion that's attached to the tire. It goes around, the caliper's around it, it pinches the pads, which wear or friction slows down the vehicle, and over time the pads, which are the contact points, wear along with the rotors. You have these normally replaced, but in terms of preventative maintenance, the only setup that really goes along with this is there's a little metal tab that's attached to this pad. You can see one that's worn away and one that's still here. This little tab's here to make contact with your rotor, and it starts to make a screeching noise. When you hear the screeching noise, it shows that it's time to have your brakes replaced. When that screeching noise breaks away, that's when you start getting into dangerous territory. Your braking distance will start to increase. You might risk yourself of getting into an accident. These are very important items of your vehicle for the fact that you're pretty much stopping 2 tons of mass metal. Filters and fluids. These are the most common preventative maintenance item that most people ignore. They cause so many issues because people don't know what they are and how they work, and they cause major problems down the line. If you consult your service manual of every vehicle, because they change from vehicle. Normally transmission is 30,000 miles, engine is 3,000 miles, but they vary from vehicle to vehicle depending on how complex the vehicle is. But they do need to be changed. For example, there are air type of filters. There's 2 types, cabin and standard engine air filter. The engine air filter stops all the contaminants from going into the intake, which pollute the engine and make poor running and blah, blah, blah. Always should be changed. As you can see, dirty to clean. In terms of transmission fluid over time can go from a beautiful red to a dark red to an amber to a almost orange haze to a burnt smell. Especially when you pull it, you can smell it very burnt. And the worst, because you don't change it over extreme amounts of time, metal shavings from the internals of the transmission will start to correlate and flow throughout the vehicle. That's when major problems happen. And simple things like knowing how to change your fluids can prevent all of that from happening. In terms of engine oil, this is pretty much how it is from my experience in any time, shape, and form. Old engine oil and new engine oil. A lot of companies put in additives and detergents that clean the internals of the engine, but as long as you keep that engine oil inside there, it'll become more acidic and tear apart every part of the car. And that's in terms of any type of fluid. The longer that you keep it, it becomes acidic and it'll eat at the seals of the car, and then it'll start to leak, which causes for more repair and raises it. As long as you change your fluids, change your filters, and are caring about your vehicle, it will last longer overall. Other preventative maintenance items. In terms of Chicago, if any one of us know that we drive around, we know that salt cakes on our cars everywhere. That's why the majority of us don't even bother to buy black cars, let's be honest. However, we know that salt is carried through this entire town, entire Chicago county, what have you, But if you leave it to cake on over time, even with modern cars I've seen nowadays, modern Dodges, modern Chryslers, modern Toyotas, they'll start to rust over 5 years' time. And this is because of careless owners, not the vehicle themselves, but the careless owners behind them. Granted, the car isn't the best or the brightest or what have you, but salt cakes on in the winter, and these are just owners who are unknowledgeable and know that they need to wash that salt-caked expressway dust off of it. And when it stays on, it starts to eat through the lacquer, eat through the paint, and then eat through the metal itself. A lot of companies nowadays, in terms of car wash, will offer monthly service, and you have the car washed and cleaned under, above, and around every day. It's also very common that you have your car waxed at least once a year so that the paint has an additional set of protection to prevent the actual metal from disappearing. In conclusion, it has been my objective to show you how different parts of the car actually work. With this knowledge, I hope it makes you a happier consumer, a safer consumer, and an overall happier car driver in Chicago nowadays. Thank you very much.
Are you a